All right, hope everybody's doing well. So, another snow day, unreal. This is what it is, I guess. I'm excited to see it's dull tomorrow here. But real quick, I wanted to talk to you today about. I wanted to talk to you today about starting World War II, and we need to kind of move back in what we're talking about with our lesson because we finished with the Great Depression, right? Well, we talked about World War One, the ending of World War One, and then we moved right into the Roaring Twenties, and then right into the Great Depression, and then all of a sudden, World War Two happens. It starts, but in a way, we need to look back to World War One to talk about the starting of World War Two. It only makes sense, right? There's two world wars, and obviously, the Second War would had to be caused. Something had to be pushed at the end of World War One to push for World War Two. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that today, and then we'll move on more tomorrow with some more information about what needs to be reviewed and talked about. But the first thing, let's just talk about where we're at with the ending of World War One. All right, so starting in World War Two, again, we got to look back to the end of World War One. And this is just a review for everybody because you all know what happened at the end of World War One. All right, you know what happened and was discussed with the 14 points that Wilson presented, okay, and how he was trying to establish peace all around the world, okay. And one of his last points of his 14 points, his plan for the world after World War One, was: listen, we cannot have another war like this ever again. We cannot have a global conflict that millions of people died in ever again. So he established the League of Nations, which we discussed and went over and talked about, of how this was an international organization where all these countries would come together and discuss disputes, conflicts before another war would arise. Okay, and one of the big key takeaways was it. Well, okay, yeah, it was a great idea, it was awesome, but the United States didn't join. Okay, Congress thought it was in America's best interest that the United States would stay out of this organization, just because we were still on the idea of isolation, staying out of European affairs and conflicts. Because why would the United States, who's halfway across the world, okay, across the Atlantic Ocean and Western Hemisphere, why would they get involved with European conflicts and affairs? So Congress decided, nope, we're not getting involved, even though it was Woodrow Wilson's idea. Even though the League of Nations was this great idea and great plan to try to prevent future warfare. But without a significant player like the United States, a country that kind of held the glue together of the world at the end of World War One, how can they see any type of cooperation? How can they join any type of unity amongst the world nations and countries to make sure that another war wouldn't ensue and another war wouldn't happen? And that's kind of where it falls, right? So League of Nations was really weak. France and Great Britain were kind of the key players to that and running the organization. And Germany didn't even have a seat at the table because they were still blamed for that war, okay, which we'll talk about here soon with the Treaty of Versailles. So League of Nations, really weak, okay? And they all kind of agreed that all the countries throughout the world should not militarize. The best way to try to prevent another war is to make sure these other countries aren't militarized and building up their militaries. So that was one thing why the League of Nations was so weak. And all these countries all throughout the world, other than the United States, was going through this Great Depression, this world depression, right? And it affected a lot of people in a lot of countries, okay? And it made to the point where all these countries were dependent on the United States for their products, for their goods, okay, for their services and supplies. And in a way, the United States was trying to promote capitalism all throughout the world and try to prevent, ding ding, we talked about it before, Red Scare, the communist spread into Europe, all around the world, right? So if the United States can send capitalistic private industry to Europe and expand their economies, expand their growth and their products, right? And building relationships and business partners in Europe and all around the world, then this would stop the spread of communism. And for the most part, it did a pretty good job, okay? And we talked about the Dawes plan as well at the end of World War One, and how this was a way that the United States could help support these countries all around, specifically in Europe, okay? And this was to help combat against a lot of the damages that were done because of World War One. The infrastructure, the factories, the businesses that were all destroyed at the end of the war. The Dawes plan was used, okay, government money, right, to be sent to Germany. They can rebuild, okay, and any type of industrial gains, profits that they gain from their supplies and products, then that money would be sent to the Allied powers, Great Britain and France. Okay, and then that money would be used to rebuild France and Great Britain. And then that money that was profited off their industries and factories would be sent to the United States. That triangle effect. Okay, we talked about that before when we went over it. So I won't really discuss it too much more in detail. All right, and then finally, the last player, which we talked about when we discussed a lot, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was established to make sure that Germany could never rise to power again. And this was really established by France, Clemenceau, right? Great Britain, David Lloyd George. And they wanted to make sure Germany doesn't become a world power ever again, a superpower, because their military strength was second to none at the start of World War One. They needed all these countries to come together to stop them. And we talked about some of those limitations, those restrictions on Germany at the end of the war. And number one, again, I'm reviewing it with you guys because you'll need to know it for the start of World War II quiz assessment coming up in the near future. Treaty of Versailles, the 5 points. Number one, the war guilt clause. Germany was solely blamed for World War One. Was it all them? Probably not. Were they aggressive? Of course they were. But at the time, there was a lot of different players that pushed for this war, which we discussed and talked about, and maybe they shouldn't have got the whole blame of the war on them. Number two, reparations. They had to pay back all these war debts. Okay, and we discussed and went over it. It took till 2010, almost 100 years, for them to fully pay off the war debts from World War One. Okay, so that was another problem that they had to face. So how can you rebuild if you're paying back really just debt and paying back the damages done in other countries all throughout Europe? It's going to be hard to do. Another one, military restrictions. Okay, we talked about that a lot. So with these military restrictions, Germany was not allowed to have a navy. Why? Because they challenged Great Britain with that naval arms race at the start of World War One. So Great Britain's like, yeah, let's throw that one in there. Make sure that they never challenge us and our authority in the seas. Okay. Also, they were limited to around 100,000 troops just for defensive purposes to make sure that there would never be an invasion or attack. All right. So again, 100,000 troops, not that much, not that significant. Okay, they were not allowed to really have a land army, land mass, because one of the biggest things that they really pounded their chest about was their weaponology, right? Their advancements in weaponry, and how there were this dominant military and this land military. That was kind of stripped from them as well. So Germany really prided themselves a lot of sense of nationalism within their military, and now it's gone. Okay. So paying back debt, sole blame of the war. Now they're losing their prideful military, the thing that they really pounded their chest on. Okay, that they were the number one at. Okay. Next thing, losses of borderlands, territorial losses, right? So some of the lands that they lost along the Rhine River, which was heavily industrialized, taken away, given to Germany or France, sorry, given to France. Okay, they won that territory, Alsace-Lorraine, at the end of the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, and France wanted it back. Okay, they had to demilitarize it to the point where it was kind of useless land. They couldn't really do too much with it, right? And again, there's a lot of factories, a lot of businesses there that they could utilize to help rebuild their economy, and it was taken away. So if they can't rebuild their economy with their industries and factories, how are they going to ever become a world power? They can't. Territorial losses, right? So territories in Africa, parts of Asia, where they had these resources and raw materials that were coming in to create these finalized goods and make these different types of goods and services. Again, taken away. So if they don't have any type of resources coming in, how can they produce finalized goods and products? They can't. All right, and finally, the last one here, we talked about a lot. They couldn't join the Treaty of Versailles. All right, sorry, they couldn't join the League of Nations. That was a huge issue for them. Okay, and it was just something that Germany really couldn't come back from. Okay, there was a lot of problems with what they're going through, and it pushed them into a depression. And we're going to mention this a little bit more in detail tomorrow. But this depression was something alarming. Okay, we talk about the Great Depression in America. This was obviously terrible. Okay, a lot of people were affected by this. But in Germany at this time, right at the end of World War One, this was even more traumatizing. This was even more of an impact because it was almost to a point where it's 10 times worse. Again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, okay, tomorrow with this depression and with how this was causing a lot of issues. And Germany was really kicked down in the dirt. And I think that's a great point, a great part where we need to start to see how Germany becomes this world power again after the Treaty of Versailles was established. Okay. And how that was really utilized and built on to make sure that Germany could never become this dominant power again. What's the best way to prevent war? Eliminate one of the key oppositions, the key opponents, key parts in World War One that started a lot of this aggression. All right, so that's all I got for today. You better watch it all because I'm going to be reviewing it with you tomorrow. There might be a quiz tomorrow, so make sure you check out that video. Take care. Have a good one.